The title of this message is The Anchor Holds. I know that's a famous song, The Anchor Holds. The question, will we hold on to the anchor, the spiritual anchor? One of the biggest blunders of Israel's history was when Jeroboam, in a sense, really canceled the anchor that locked the northern 10 tribes to the true religion of the true God. And really the lifeguards, the Levitical priest, he cut them loose too, sort of like cutting your lifeboat as well. And they drifted off into, let's say, counterfeit religion, and they never had a revival, a good king. They went from bad, really bad, the worst ever. That's pretty much the history of the northern 10. 1 Kings 12:32. 1 Kings 12:32. Jeroboam ordained a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month. Some people think that's where Oktoberfest had its original roots, but regardless, he came up with counterfeit feast days, which he had devised in his own heart. In other words, they weren't based on anything God had written, said. He did it for political reasons. He reasoned that even though God promised him he could have a throne like David's, he didn't have the faith. He said, Israel has a central religion built around the temple in Jerusalem. That may make me politically vulnerable, so they did the human political thing. He created a counterfeit religion. Now, I'm going to mention Christmas. I'm not saying Christmas is exactly the same as what Jeroboam did, but I just want to let us know that we are right not to keep Christmas. It's a counterfeit holy day. I mean, Christ was really born, and Luke, the first couple chapters, is correct if you hear it quoted today or yesterday sometime. But Christmas is a counterfeit birthday for Christ. But interesting, the world, now I'm giving my opinion, and we discussed this on the pod last night too. The world has shifted, and now I know higher education did it 12 years ago. They shifted from saying Christmas or Easter break to holiday season or winter solstice. Well, holiday season or spring break or winter solstice actually is worse. You're like kicking the name of God out totally. And now they wouldn't see it this way, of course, when they say winter season. They're getting God's name out. And by the way, and there are a lot of atheist humanists in the leadership of American media, American companies, American government. They want God out of everything, period. We don't even want to counterfeit Christ in the public square. Keep it only in your churches, and even there we want to squish it as much as we can. So I think it's worse. But I could be wrong. Some people don't think so. They say, well, Christ had no business in any of this anyway. But instead of being an internecine debate among Christians about what's the right date for his birthday, they want to get rid of the whole thing. They take Christ and God out of everything. I think it's worse, but we all have our own opinions. They want no God, no way, no how in the public square. But one thing we are right. I'm going to give you two reasons why today is not the birthday of Christ. First is, Luke, being a good historian, gives us clues to calculate the general season when Christ was born. And these clues are pretty clear. And really, good Bible scholars do not doubt that the reason December 25th was chosen, it was the date of the Saturnalia, and when they wanted to turn the Roman Empire into the Holy Roman Empire and be in Christianity or Roman Catholicism, the Universal Church, as the official church of the Holy Roman Empire, it was easier to just let the pagans keep the same days, pretty much the same customs. We'll just put a new label on it. And that's when the sun comes back up higher in the horizon. It's down, right about now, or a few days before it starts back up. And by the way, everybody agrees. They didn't pick it because they had some document showing Christ was born on December 25th. But anyway, Luke 1:5. There was in the days of Herod a certain priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah. And when you go into Chronicles, First Chronicles 24, you'll find that's the 8th one. And they start because Jewish holy day calendar starts in March. The 8th one takes you to June or possibly the 1st of July. And and at that time, he was told by an angel that he would, even though he was an elderly man and his wife was elderly, they would have a miracle child, just like all the others in the Bible, Abraham, Isaac, same principle, and they would make that child very special, just like in the case of Abraham and Isaac, and that was John the Baptist. Luke 1:24. Now after those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived. That's after that priesthood I just mentioned, which would be June or possibly the 1st of July. She had a baby. She hid herself 5 months. Verse 26, now in the 6th month of this process of her having the baby, an angel Gabriel went to Galilee and appeared to a virgin named Mary and told her, you're now with a child. And by the way, if you read the whole story, the two women got together, and John the Baptist, as a fetus, celebrated being in the presence of Christ, a fetus. But they're 6 months apart. That's the key thing. 6 months apart. That's the key factor. So, if John the Baptist got impregnated in June or possibly the 1st of July, then John the Baptist would have been born 9 months later in March or possibly the 1st of April. And if Christ were 6 months younger, you extend out 6 months from March, April, you get September, October. That's the fall holy days. And that's historically documented. Christ was born in the fall, probably the Feast of Trumpets, when he will come back, well, at least figuratively. It's an interesting thing. Obviously, we can't be sure of everything because God didn't give us exact dates, which meant he wants us to celebrate the holy days he's got. We're really focusing more on Christ's death and sacrifice and his second coming than on his birthday. But I'm still not diminishing his birthday, of course. I'm just saying that's what God wanted us to celebrate. It's interesting that when the angel came to Mary, she said, call him. Now, Joshua, I want to just clarify it. I know Carl mentioned it as well. But the angel said Joshua. But in the Greek, the word Joshua is Jesus. And English comes straight out of the Greek. It's just the way our educational system works. English is a newer language. So Jesus is actually the same as Joshua. That's why you see how the fitting of trumpets, Joshua blew the trumpets in the promised land and took over Canaan. Christ is coming back and going to blow the Feast of Trumpets and take over the world. But that's just speculation about the exact details. But one thing we know, Christ was born in the fall, not in the end of December, in a dead cold winter. In case some of you think, well, Jerusalem's the Middle East, it never gets cold there. Jerusalem is up on the top of Mount Zion. Because of the altitude, actually it snows in Jerusalem sometimes, it does. It's cold up there at night, it's an altitude thing. Even in warm California and the high Sierra Mountains, they have snow now. I mean, they're celebrating they got like a 20-inch snowfall because they have ski resorts up there. That's what they need badly. And also when it melts, it helps their water reserves later in the spring when it melts. But anyway, my point is it's cold. The second point I want to make that proves that Christ was not born December 25th, besides the historical records of the course of the priest, is also the shepherds were living outside. They would not live, and the sheep, they had barns, that's where the stable is. They don't have stables for nothing. When the winter, especially nighttime in the winter, it gets cold, they bring those sheep inside. And the shepherds don't sleep outside at night in the dark, in the middle of a cold winter. That would be one way to get sick. Anyway, I'll read the scripture, but you all know it. Luke 2, 7 and 8. She brought forth her first son, laid him in a manger, or we might call it a barn, because there is no room for them in the inn. Now there were in the same country shepherds living out in the field, keeping watch over their sheep by night. You don't go out at night in the wintertime. Even when you have a mild day, the nights are usually pretty cold. So those are two proofs that we are right. This date, December 25th, is a Saturnalia. It's a pagan counterfeit. You're doing the right thing by being here and not at a Christmas party. We all know it, but I just want to remind us of why it's true. So what are the anchors? The anchors are God's holy days. That includes the weekly Sabbath, the annual Sabbath. I'm going to read Exodus 31:13. Most of us know this verse, but I just want to reiterate things we already know because it's important to remind ourselves of this. When the world is so overwhelming us with Christmas carols and Christmas gifts, and what's wrong with you all? You aren't Christian. You're not keeping Christmas. And I know that's what people think. Actually, we're more Christian than they are. They don't know it yet. They'll find out someday. Exodus 31:13. Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, surely my Sabbaths. And the S on the end of the word Sabbaths means it's plural. See, if it just said Sabbath, it'd be the weekly Sabbath. But Sabbath with an S means it includes the weekly Sabbath and the annual Sabbaths, which includes, unleavened bread, and all that goes into the Passover celebration, Christ's death, Pentecost, and the fall holy days. And you shall keep. It is a sign between me and you throughout your generations. It's the anchor that has us connected to the true God. When you break that anchor by, as Jeroboam did, removing the holy days, and the people that knew the Bible, it's like a ship in the harbor. Without an anchor, the current will push it out of harbor and usually into the shoals where there are dangerous rocks, and bad things will happen. That's what happened to the nation of Israel, the northern 10. They lost their identity. We want to hold on tightly to God. We want external safety, but we also want spiritual safety. I know we know the story, but I'm going to tell it one more time. Get it on this tape, because I learned this from teaching. In the old days, they always taught about the turning point in the American Revolution was Washington's Christmas Day attack on Trenton, New Jersey. And there was that picture of him crossing the Delaware, with his cape on and standing up on a little small boat. And it's a great painting of Washington. Well, how did Washington know that the soldiers, mostly were Hessians, those German soldiers, how did he know they would be drunk today? How did he know that? Because he knew on Christmas Day in Europe, everybody gets drunk. Well, the Christmas Day, they got a horrible hangover. And those were good, very professional soldiers. Their centuries weren't ready. It was an easy victory. They were drunk. You would normally not get a victory over hardened professional German soldiers like that and British soldiers. And he went on after that victory at Trenton. He got the British 1 or 2 more times and actually drove them out of much of New Jersey. But the big thing was Washington had been losing the war because he just had volunteer army, and the British brought 300 of the line battleships and a big chunk of their army, and brought, as I said, thousands of German mercenary soldiers. They were outgunned and, in every way. And they defeated Washington, defeat after defeat, as they pushed him out of New Jersey, crossed the Delaware. And many of his recruits were going to leave. They only signed up for 1 year, and it was a losing. Nobody wants to be on the side of a loser. You'll find that true of coaches. When they start winning, everybody's on their side. When they're losing, they all rats leave a sinking ship. Well, after that victory, 15,000 people volunteered for Washington's army, and most of the guys who were going to leave stayed. It was a turning point in the war. You could argue that if the American colonists had been keeping Christmas, the American Revolution would have failed. And you all know the Puritans who were the major establishers of the American colonies were all, when they say Puritans, they meant worshiping the Bible as purely accurate as possible. We could argue about, they had different varieties of doctrines, but still, being that biblical, they clearly saw that Christmas was not biblical. And Christmas was outlawed until about 1840-something in most of America. And that's a fact. Most people don't know that. It was outlawed. So Washington's people weren't keeping Christmas. And he knew the other side would be drunk. It is smart of him, if you think about it. And he was desperate. That's probably the only way he had a chance to win. So I just want us to realize that this day actually represents a great victory for America. And you never think about the Trenton, New Jersey, crossing the Delaware victory for George Washington and the American Revolution. Okay, this joke is called a midnight call. Midnight call. A lawyer phoned the governor's mansion, middle of the night. He finally got one of the governor's assistants on the phone. And this young lawyer said, I got to talk to the governor. It's an emergency. I must talk to the governor. And the assistant said, well, look, it's middle of the night. Can't you wait till 8:30 or 9 in the morning and the governor is eating breakfast? No, I got to talk to him now. It's an emergency. And the governor is finally awakened, and he talks to the lawyer. And he said, well, what's the big emergency? He grumbled. Judge Pearson just died, said the young lawyer, and I want to take his place. Whoa. The governor was shocked. You woke me up for this? He said, well, it's okay with me if it's okay with the funeral home. Yeah, it's okay with the funeral home. But, the point of that joke is misplaced judgment. He wanted that job so bad. But that's what happened to the Israelites when they put a counterfeit religion. They had golden calves. And I want to read 2 Chronicles, but there's a second part of that. We mentioned on the podcast last night, too. A second part of what he did, 2 Chronicles 11:14. And this is the second part. For the Levites left their common lands and their possessions and came to Judah and Jerusalem. That's from the 10 northern tribes. They went south. For Jeroboam and his sons had rejected them from serving. In other words, he told the Levites, you're out of here, boys. You're not going to be clerics and all the other, they're also health inspectors and judges. You're out of here. I'm putting my own people in those nice, cushy jobs. Get lost. From serving as priest. Then he appointed him priest for himself, and he put in the high places, like hilltops, demons and calf idols. Now, when it says demons, a good translation is, it looks like a goat with weird horns, and it looks like a devil, but I think it means idols, goat-like idols that look devilish, but they're really, what can I say? And actually, they put something like that, a goat-like devil-looking thing, next to the nativity scene in Chicago. I saw that a few days ago. I couldn't believe it. I know Chicago's gone off the deep edge. They're going off the deep edge spiritually in Chicago as well. Not just defunding the police and undermining bail laws, but... And it didn't get that much bad publicity in Chicago. Most of you probably never heard of it. Anyway, that's what he did. And this bad king, by getting rid of the Levites, he took Bible knowledge away from the Israelites because there weren't printed Bibles and scrolls were rare. So they were like walking Bibles. By the way, for much of the world's history, people memorized the Bible or parts of it, and there'd be a guy who would visit a church in the 1100s A.D. and they say, he knows all the writings of John. He can repeat them verbatim with total accuracy, and that's what he could do. He'd repeat all of maybe John, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and then give a sermon about what he just said. And the Levites were supposed to memorize the law, the first 5 books of the Bible, and know all about all that inspection stuff that's all, and health stuff and health food and things that are in the Bible. They knew all about that, and they knew God's laws. So when you get rid of the Levites, it's like getting rid of the Bible in its day, and then the guys you replace often called lowest of men. That's how the King James translates it. You get guys who know nothing. They have no knowledge of the Bible, and they will teach anything Jeroboam says. They don't know the difference, right? He actually said, these golden calves, and I guess the goat one that's on the high mountaintops, they represent the God that led us out of Egypt. So he's trying to get to the original God, but in a counterfeit manner. And most of you know this, but I'm just going to repeat it. When you read Deuteronomy and Numbers, God reminds them that when he appeared to them on Mount Sinai in this giant smoking cloud and a fire, and his voice was booming like a waterfall and the earth was shaking, they actually didn't see God, just a glow in that smoky cloud that protected them from God's glow. But they didn't actually see his face or his form. And God and Moses reminded them that. So don't make any carvings, drawings, pictures, wood cuttings of what you think God looked like. People often wonder, why did God do that? Maybe we don't know the full answer, but in part, people have a tendency toward idolatry, taking some little object, and maybe it's got a picture of something or a coin with a picture on it, and you start thinking this is God, and you wear it around your neck, or you know what I mean. Plus, I don't think any artwork can picture the fullness and the greatness of God. I'm not saying they couldn't do, and nowadays with 3D photography, and they can do a better job, but even still, God has dimensions that you just can't put in art. Does that make sense? So God said, don't do it. Worship me in spirit and in truth, and don't make pictures, carvings, drawings. And so God intentionally did not show his form to anybody except Moses. And he only saw the backside of God and glowed for weeks because of that. The point is, God didn't want that. But Jeroboam did it anyway. And you think about the golden calves are young bulls. And bulls were a source of power. And they're one of the major pagan symbols. Well, they are. Bulls and young calves. And same with the goat. All I can say is paganism is there. And basically, when the Roman Catholic Church became the official church of the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire influenced Christianity more. I mean, they both influenced each other. I'm not trying to say there was no Christian influence. But a lot of their basic principles, Chief Pontiff, that office existed before Constantine's time. Julius Caesar won that office in his political climb to power. Vestal Virgins, College of Cardinals, they all existed in the Roman Empire long before it became the official religion of the Holy Roman Empire. My point is, the world has been in a counterfeit Christianity. That's better than nothing. I'm not trying to take it away, but it's still not what God wants, because it's like that anchor. When you get rid of the Sabbath and the holy days, and you put in counterfeits and idols, even if you mean well, so I'm not saying people don't mean well, that anchor is broken, and like a ship, you start drifting downstream. And we all know, don't we all know this is Satan's world? Satan's age? And the drift is going to always be away from God, away from good, wholesome values, away from, you can see it in higher education, always drifts to the far left. The legal profession always drifts to the far left. Hollywood always drifts to the far left. Do you know that there was a time when they had a code in Hollywood? I'll call it a morality code. They didn't actually call it that, but they tried to put positive moral themes in most movies and avoid things that were negative. I mean, that's actually true. Some people complained about it in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And I'm not saying there weren't bad things there, but they weren't all that bad. They really weren't. You go back and look at even TV shows made in the 50s, it was just so much different. And nowadays, for example, the Writers Guild, which they're the ones that influence movies and TV shows, I heard last year they or their union leaders or somebody was complaining that TV shows did not have a high enough percentage of LGBTQ plus. And it's more like whatever the plus, many other things. And I think they were down to 10 or 20% of the characters would be. They want more than that. They want more than that. I think, wow. I'm still trying to get used to two men kissing on television. I know you're old-fashioned, but isn't that what we should be, right? So my point is the anchor, that is Bible and Bible principles. And maybe America and any place in the world, and since it's Satan's world, has never been as good as it should be, and there are bad people everywhere. North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, wherever else I forgot. And so obviously that's true in Satan's world. But in a relative sense, so I'm saying relative sense, the King James Bible came from England. Most of the missionary and charity money in the world comes from America and secondly Britain. I bet that'll surprise, and far, far away. Nobody's even close. The country that was founded, because when the Puritans came, for the most part, they used Bible principles. And I thought it was an interesting story. When the captain kicked them off the ship in Plymouth Rock, they were supposed to go further south where the weather was warmer because it was November and in the middle of this big dark forest and the winter's coming out. He said, I don't care. The weather's too treacherous. I'm heading back to England. I'm kicking you all off. They said, well, who's going to be in charge? He said, that's your problem. And that, the Mayflower Compact, which is very biblical, they said, well, we will decide for ourselves. The people will choose our leaders. Now we might laugh and like, well, what's the big deal? In their world, that 1619, that was very unique. Kings and overlords made those decisions, and big-time chieftains. But and that got the tradition, as Lincoln said, for the people, of the people, and by the people. I mean, I'm putting it all in context. And Thanksgiving, there are schools where even when they mention Thanksgiving, they don't say who the pilgrims were thankful for. They were thankful for God for them surviving. I know I've told this story before, but God brought them a translator, probably the only man on the planet who was both a Christian and spoke the Indian languages of that area, the Massasoit tribes, and the King's English, because he had lived in London for 14 years, and that's another story we can tell you later. But the point is, what a blessing that was for them to survive. So my point is, God has blessed America. We don't always see it, because when you're blessed, but what you'll find out is when foreigners come here, like people come here from Jamaica, from Nigeria, from Latin America, I've met some from places in Europe as well, mostly Eastern Europe. And they get to America and they see the supermarkets and you all are blessed and you don't even know you're blessed. Of all colors. And even a lot of immigrants from Asia and China, they want to come here. They're paying the cartels on the Mexican border thousands of dollars crossing, and somewhat dangerous too, to get to America. We are blessed. We just don't realize we're blessed. And I know you're going to say, oh, I got tons of debts, and and we're having economic problems, and my kids are having drug problems. I admit there are problems, but relative to the rest of the world, we're still blessed. And what we need to do, and I wish our school systems would do more of it, and churches would do more of it, teach the next generation about God and the Bible more so, to keep that anchor held, because it looks bleak. But what Jeroboam found was a bunch of priests who did not know the Bible, who would teach anything for a buck, for a nice cushy position. And in those days, being a priest was a nice cushy position. Hosea 4:6. My people are destroyed, Hosea 6, for a lack of knowledge, because you rejected knowledge. And then God says they rejected God. And that was disaster for that nation. And so what we need to do is embrace as much Bible knowledge as we can, because that's also an anchor. Bible knowledge is also an anchor. And my last scripture, we need Bible knowledge to save and help others. I want to read what James said about helping others. James 5:19 through 20. James 5:19. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death, and Peter says even from the fire, and cover a multitude of sins. In other words, God really will bless you if you can pull somebody back from the fire. If somebody's about to go back to the world, and I know the world has a big pull, and we're small, and the world has a lot of benefits they can give them. If you have the Bible knowledge and the spirit of encouragement, and you can't force anybody to come back, so beating them over the head, but if you can encourage them to pull back, I will argue that not only will God bless you, and it'll make you stronger spiritually, which is a good thing, but you might save them, and God will be happy for that. And doing that sort of thing will be good for us. And we believers can make the anchor whole for ourselves with Bible knowledge and a determination to encourage each other. And we can make the anchor whole for other believers as well.